Okay, well, I'm glad to say I have a very special guest with me today, Mr. Mike Pollock, the voice actor for Dr. Eggman from the Sonic the Hedgehog series.
Thank you so much.
Okay, so first question is, what inspired you to get into voice acting?
I loved radio ever since I was a kid and hearing people doing wacky voices and doing theater of the mind. So I was in radio for a while late in high school and then in college. And eventually, after working in radio for a while, realizing what I really loved about radio is doing wacky voices in commercials and comedy bits. And radio started to turn crappy, as it has in recent years, and voice acting started to be much more appealing. Because in voice acting, I can do commercials and cartoons and promos and narrations and all sorts of stuff, and that's what I'm doing these days.
So, how did you find yourself voicing Dr. Eggman?
I'd already done some work in with 4 kids after doing an episode of Pokemon, which I responded to a classified ad, and they liked me and got that little gig. And then they started doing the Fox Box, which became 4 Kids TV, and they got me on board to do roles in Kirby Right Back at Ya and Ultimate Muscle and promos and stuff for the Fox Box. And a year or so into that, they added Sonic X, and they started auditioning people, and I was one of the people they were auditioning for various roles, and they seemed to really want me for Dr. Eggman, and they had to really push to convince Sega to get me as Dr. Eggman. And after a very lengthy audition process, we finally convinced Sega that I was the guy for the job.
Right, and I remember the first time I saw Sonic X and I heard your Dr. Eggman voice. You were the highlight of the show, in my opinion.
Thank you. I guess I would have to agree.
So, what was it like working with people like Jason Griffith?
Working with is an odd term because although I would see them in the halls, we never recorded together. Because when you're dubbing stuff, it's you have greater control over dialogue placement when you record separately. So that sort of voice acting is really not acting in the traditional sense because you're recording alone and responding to either voices that have been recorded before or voices that have not yet been recorded. So working separately but equally was great fun. And then meeting folks like Jason in between sessions is very cool as well for some quick casual conversation.
Do you find it strange that Sega wanted to change everybody's voice actor but you?
Well, they kind of wanted to make it change all the way through because it's a business type of thing, and they're in complete control over who's voicing their characters. And they actually had re-auditioned me for the role of Dr. Eggman, and I guess I got the role twice in a row because they liked my second round of auditions.
I was sad to see Jason Griffith go, but I was glad that they had you still as Dr. Eggman.
Thank you. I had mixed emotions because I know all my New York friends from knowing them in New York. So yeah, it was tough to see them go. But again, it's a business thing. Sega does what they want.
And what's it like playing a role like Dr. Eggman?
It's very cathartic. I get to get all my aggressions out in a room instead of face to face with friends and loved ones. So it's great fun, especially when there's some comedy to play with, because I much prefer playing comedy than just straight out evil.
So, have you met any of the new cast members? Like, do you
No,
talk to them?
they're all in LA. I'm Facebook friends with a couple of them, but we don't really interact because, again, we are employed by the same people on this particular series of jobs, but they're in LA and I'm in a studio in New York, hooked up in a fancy digital phone line, just talking to directors and producers. So, despite what the finished product may suggest, we don't really have any direct interactions.
And so, how weird was it for you to play two separate Dr. Eggmans that basically sounded like they were talking to each other?
It's cool. I always like doing more than one character in a show to show off versatility. Um, Doing two characters that are basically the same voice is a different sort of challenge, but it's basically a matter of recording each character separately. So I run through all the lines on one, switch to a different track, and do a different character, and run through the other lines. The real magic is when the engineers put it together when they're done, and then it sounds like an actual conversation.
So you didn't just record one little session of you yelling at yourself as two Eggmans.
No, it's easier for they have more control generally when you're recording characters separately. So I just did one pass of Eggman and one pass of the other Eggman, and they did the magic.
What was your reaction when they said that you and your friends from 4Kids should voice the characters of Sonic the Hedgehog in the video games also?
Again, because I love working so much, it was cool to be able to do even more work. But it was a great honor to carry the mantle of such a prestigious franchise.
And are you a fan of the Sonic the Hedgehog franchise?
I'm a little too old to be in the demographic that Sonic is meant to appeal to. I had some passing knowledge of Sonic when I first got the gig. Obviously, did a little more research once I did get the gig. But Sonic, with all due respect, is not targeted as towards 47-year-old guys.
Right. Well, so have you ever voice acted for movies or ever been in a movie as well?
And funny you should ask. Just this past weekend, as we're recording this, I was in the premiere of a French film that we dubbed in English called A Cat in Paris. And I played a goofy gangster called Mr. Baby with a baffling German accent, according to one reviewer. So look for that in theaters near you. It's opening limited release in New York, LA, San Diego, San Francisco this weekend, and then I'd like to hope that it gets a wider release sometime later this summer.
Might have to check that movie out.
Please do.
So how often do people ask for a chance to talk to you?
It varies. This past weekend, there's been 4 or 5 interview requests that I have banged out in fairly rapid succession. But there's a lot of random chatting on Facebook. But as far as full-on Skype-enabled interviews, every couple of weeks, there's a bunch.
I noticed that one of my friends had an interview with you.
Mm-hmm. It's usually a matter of asking. People ask, wow, how'd you get to talk to Mike Pollock? It's just a matter of asking.
And it's just nice that you're one of those people that takes the time out of their day and talks to the fans.
Thank you. If the time is available, I'm happy to make it available for an interview.
Yes. What was your favorite game to be voicing Dr. Eggman in?
The comedy of Sonic Colors was very fun and refreshing. And then just the range of characters in Sonic Generations and also the comedy there was also really nice. So
yeah, I remember in Sonic Colors, hearing all your little comments you would say in Colors, and I would stop just listen to them.
Yep, those were fun.
This ride is not for small children or big babies.
Exactly.
So you also played, apparently you played Ella on Sonic X.
Yes, I did.
That's funny. It's funny because I thought Ella's voice sounded similar to yours.
Yep.
And I looked in the credits and I saw, oh wow, he actually voices her.
I'm much more versatile than people give me credit for. So I was thrilled to be able to have such an untraditional casting as Ella. And it made me laugh whenever I had to do any of that dialogue.
Was it fun recording for Sonic X? Because that show doesn't get a lot of appreciation.
It was fun just because it's easier to follow a linear plot in a cartoon as opposed to the somewhat non-linear, jumbled, and not quite as extensive plot of a video game. Because a video game, you got a bunch of cutscenes, and then you got a lot of type of react. But with a cartoon, there's a linear plot that you can follow, even when you're dubbing and you're not seeing the entire show. But at least the director will explain, okay, here's what's happening in this episode, and go. And it's just easier to voice that sort of thing.
And what inspired your Dr. Eggman laugh?
A lot of that was taken from, well, the original characterization was based on Dean Bristow, they gave me samples for the audition. And so I tried to match in the very early episodes. I did a much more closer thing to Dean Bristow down here. And once we started recording the series, there were moments of the high-pitched, ooh, laugh that they wanted. So I tried to give that my best shot, which, depending on whether I was suffering from a nasty bout of laryngitis, which I had for a couple of months during the recording of that series, I would do the ooh hoo hoo as they wished.
Hmm. And do you still talk to the 4Kids people?
Whenever whenever the 4Kids producers call me in for anything, it's always a thrill. They're not dubbing that much stuff these days, so I'm not in the studio that often. But I'll bounce into or I'll bump into the Jason Griffiths of the world and the Dan Greens and the Lisa Ortizes on various other projects. I just saw Lisa today for an audition because she's working as a director at some other place. And I saw Dan just last week. He's doing some voiceover coaching at a place. So, yeah, we run into each other at various places depending on where we might happen to be auditioning or recording around the city.
Hmm. And has Sega ever let you just record your own lines that were not in the script, and you just said them and they actually put them into something?
The closest we got to that was in Sonic Colors when we were doing the PA announcements, and just for the amusement of the folks back in LA, because they were in LA and I wasn't, I did the famous LAX boarding announcement of the white zone is for immediate loading and unloading and passengers only. There's no parking in the white zone. And that unfortunately got a laugh in the control room, but it ended up on the cutting room floor.
Hmm. And do you think you'll be voicing Eggman for many more years?
I'd like to think so. It's been a while since the last recording, but I'm an independent contractor and I'm hired at will. They call me when they need me, and when they don't need me, they won't call.
Hmm. Well, that's all the questions I could really think of.
Okay.
I'd like to thank you, Mike Pollock, for taking the time out of your day to do this interview with me.
Sure. Thanks for asking, and thanks for asking questions.
Once again, thank you, and I'm a huge fan, and thank you for taking your time. And
Oh, glad
hope
service.
to hear you for many more years in Sonic games.
No one would agree with you more than I would.